Good morning. Go ahead and get started. We got this old microphone out, so hopefully it's working. Justin's going to lead us in opening prayer real fast, and we'll start.
Let's pray. Father, it's such a great day to be this morning together. Father, we're gathered here to study your word a little bit, and worship. Father, I pray that our minds, our hearts are in the right place. Enter into time of study, time of word, Father. I pray there's something help us take with us throughout the week. Help us think about, Father. Father, I thank you so much for the way that words. This, Father, I pray that you bless this as we try to learn more about you. Father, I thank you for all that you brought up. Father, we thank you for your son.
All right, so we're actually coming to the end of the, semester. We only have this class and then two more after this. We've been studying parting words of the wise and looking at characters specifically and looking at their life in a character study format and then applying that to their final words. Today we're going to be looking at Samuel. So if you open your Bibles with me to 1 Samuel. And if you didn't bring your own Bible, using the Pew Bible there, it's page 266, book of 1 Samuel. So here in chapter 1, 1 Samuel, I'm going to move through it pretty quickly. We meet the family of Elkanah, who has two wives, one of which he loves more, which always seems to be the case, as Zach pointed out, when there's more than one wife involved. His wife, Peninnah, granted him children. His favorite wife, Hannah, was not able to bear children, because it says there in chapter 1 that God had closed her womb. It says here every year they go up to Shiloh and make an offering to God. That's where they go, starting in verse 8. And I guess I'm just going to have to look down the entire time, so I'm looking at you. Yes. Let's look at chapter 1, verse 11 real quick. And it said there, as they go up to Shiloh, this is Hannah speaking, she said, then she made a vow and said to the Lord of hosts, if you will indeed look at the affliction of your maidservants and remember me, and not forget your maidservants, but will give your maidservant a male child, then I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life, and no razor shall come upon his head. So while they're still, during her prayer even, Hannah runs into Eli, the priest and judge of the time. He finds her looking like a drunken and crazy person. She explains to him she's just praying fervently at the moment. And he tells her to go in peace and God will grant her prayer. Skip down with me to 27, chapter 1. So she's been told God will grant her prayer. And, verse 19. So in verse 19, the family goes home. Hannah becomes pregnant, and she raises the child till he is weaned, and they go back to Shiloh to sacrifice. And then verse 27, and for this child I prayed, and the Lord has granted me my petition, which I asked for. Therefore I have also lent to the Lord as long as he lives. He shall be lent to the Lord. So they worship the Lord there. So she prayed for a child and said, if you give me a male son, I will give him to you to serve you. And here at the end of the chapter she does. Chapters 2 starts with Hannah's prayer. I don't mean to gloss over it, but I want to get to Samuel. And this prayer does show something very important, though, and that is the faith, the belief, and in the power of God. And this is Hannah's prayer. So this is Samuel's mother. We see her belief and her faith here. I think that's important to note. Here in verse 19 of chapter 2, the family goes home and they leave Samuel to minister before Eli the priest. So how old is Samuel when his service to God starts? Yeah, exactly. So she said it was there in verse 24. Verse 24, chapter 1. It says when he was weaned. So, very young, one would assume, and hope. And again, just like we brought out about Joseph, God chose exactly Samuel was born, right? He chose when he started his life of service. There in verse 12 and down through 17 of chapter 2, we see the sin of Eli's two sons. And some of the things they did as young men, it calls them there. These would have been guys that Samuel would have seen as an impressionable child. Eli had to have been a bit of a father figure to him now. And he would have heard of Eli's sons' dealings, in part, I imagine. But does he do like them? No. If we continue reading in verse 18, chapter 2 there. But Samuel ministered before the Lord, even as a child, wearing a linen ephod. And moreover, his mother used to make him a little robe and bring it to him year by year when she came up with her husband to offer the yearly sacrifice. And Eli would bless Elkanah and his wife and say, "The Lord give you descendants from this woman for the loan that was given to the Lord." Then they would go to their own home, and the Lord visited Hannah, so that she conceived and bore 3 sons and 2 daughters. Meanwhile, the child Samuel grew before the Lord. So, what influence does Hannah have on Samuel? Right. Right, so she had him for a little while. And in continuing on, so he's away from his mother. But she still have him. She visits yearly, right? I would expect he was excited to see his mother. And I'm sure he looked forward to it. And I would expect, while she was there, she told him why he was there, why she left him, and the purpose of his life, and the service to God that was expected. I would think she had a profound impact on him. And then it ended that section with God rewarded his parents for Samuel. Here in verse 22 through the end of the chapter, we read more of the sins of Eli's sons. Eli rebukes them, but doesn't really put an effective stop to their ways. It notes there in verse 26, and it says there, "And the child Samuel grew in stature and favor with the Lord." In verse 27, a man of God comes to Eli and tells him that because his sons continued in their sins, he tells of the death of those sons, and he basically curses Eli's house so that no man would live to old age. He says immediately after those deaths, God will raise up a faithful priest, and the house of Eli will come to that priest for bread, for work and position. Moving into chapter 3 of 1 Samuel, look at verse 1 through 5 with me. "Now the boy Samuel ministered to the Lord before Eli, and the word of the Lord was rare in those days. There was no widespread revelation. It came to pass at that time, while Eli was lying down in his place, and when his eyes began to go so dim that he could not see, before the lamp of God went out the tabernacle of the Lord, where the ark of God was, and while Samuel was lying down, that the Lord called Samuel, and he answered, "Here I am." So he ran to Eli and said, "Here I am, for you called me." And he said, "I did not call. Lie down again." And he went and lay down. The Lord here calls Samuel 2 more times, and the third time he runs and wakes up Eli. Eli realizes it's God calling the boy. If you'll jump down to verse 9, therefore Eli said to Samuel, "Go lie down, and it shall be, if he calls you, you must say, 'Speak, Lord, for your servant hears.' So Samuel went and lay down in his place. Now the Lord came and stood Now the Lord came and stood and called as the other time, 'Samuel, Samuel,' and Samuel answered, 'Speak, for your servant hears.'" God here tells Samuel what he's going to do to the house of Eli, because Eli did not restrain his sons, it says there in verse 13. In the morning, Eli has Samuel tell him everything which he heard. That gets us down to verse 18 here. And verse 18, Samuel told him everything, and he hid nothing from him. And he said, "It is the Lord. Let him do what seems good to him." So Samuel grew, and the Lord was with him, and he let none of his words fall to the ground. What does that mean? Let none of his words fall to the ground. Nate said they need to be listened to, the words. What else do y'all think it means? I think absolutely, yeah. So he was saying they proved to be true. So God was with Samuel, right, as a prophet. And God brought to pass whatever he told Samuel to say. So Samuel becomes well known by the people. Here's this chapter concludes. It's important to point out here because it shows God is fully and directly established Samuel's role. He was with Samuel. God made sure all of Israel knew Samuel and knew he was a prophet, the speaker of God. Moving into chapter 4. Remember, this is during the time of the Philistines. The time the Philistines are basically constantly harassing and warring with the Israelites and taking their land and goods. Here in chapter 4, the Israelites decide to go to battle with the Philistines. 4,000 men are killed, and then they get the idea that they should get God involved because we have no record of them consulting God before going to battle with the Philistines. And so they send to Shiloh for the Ark of the Covenant to be brought up because, well, that's how they won the wars in the first place. And the two priests that come with the Ark are Hophni and Phinehas, the two evil sons of Eli that we talked about a moment ago. And they died as the prophecy said, and the ark was captured and taken by the Philistines. Word of all this gets back to Eli, and he falls out of his chair and breaks his neck, dies. Quite the reaction. Chapter 4 here ends with Eli's family mourning the loss and the acknowledgement, which I think is important, that God has turned from them, turned from the people, turned from Israel at this time. Chapter 5 and 6 here are about the Philistines moving the ark around, trying to keep it here and there, only to be plagued. 6 ends with them sending the ark back to the Israelites, and it stops in Kiriath-Jearim, where it stays there for 20 years, we can see in chapter 7, verse 2. So chapter 7, God has now made Samuel judge over Israel. And I just wanted to read a quick few verses here in 7. If you'll start with me at the end of verse 2. And all the houses of Israel lamented after the Lord. Then Samuel spoke to all the house of Israel, saying, if you return to the Lord with all your hearts, then put away the foreign gods and the Ashtaroths from among you, and prepare your hearts for the Lord, and serve him only, and he will deliver you from the hand of the Philistines. So the children of Israel put away the Baals and the Ashtaroths, served the Lord only. And Samuel said, gather all Israel to Mizpah, and I will pray to the Lord for you. The Philistines find out here that all the people are gathered at Mizpah, and they come down on them to attack them, and the people are afraid here, and they tell Samuel, do not cease crying out to God on our behalf. And Samuel makes a sacrifice, and if you'll jump with me down to verse 10. Now Samuel was offering up the burnt offering. The Philistines drew near to the battle against Israel, but the Lord thundered with a loud thunder upon the Philistines that day, and so confused them, they were overcome before Israel. So Israel drives back the Philistines, even taking back a lot of the land they'd lost in the process. And then they're in verse 12. And then Samuel took a stone and set it up between Mizpah and Shen, and called its name Ebenezer, saying, thus far the Lord has helped us. So the Philistines were subdued, and they did not come any more into the territory of Israel. And the hand of the Lord was against the Philistines all the days of Samuel. And then if you'll jump down with the chapter to verse 15, and Samuel judged Israel all the days of his life. I think verse 15 here is a very important one to not overlook. So how long does Samuel continue to judge Israel after this point? How much longer did it say? The rest of his life, right? He continues to judge Israel the rest of his life. So, up to this point, Samuel has served God faithfully. God gave Samuel prophecies which came true, and that's why I run through these parts about Eli, and this is the conclusion of Samuel's first prophecy. At this point, is Samuel near death? Is Samuel about to die? He's not. No. And there's no imminent death. So chapter 8 starts with Samuel growing old, making his sons judges. They, it says there, did not walk in Samuel's ways. Right? And now what happens? Someone help me sum up this part. I think this is the part where most of us remember about Samuel. And in response to his sons, what did the people do? Ask for a king. Like, right. So Samuel spends the rest of chapter 8 giving them a bunch of reasons why they do not want a king. And then they're like, you're right, that does sound like a terrible idea. No. They didn't listen to a word Samuel says. God has supported all of his words, right? God has given him prophecy. They've all come in true. And he tells them this is a terrible idea, and they don't listen to him and demand a king anyway. Does Samuel have a reason to feel slighted here? Seems so, right? I mean, he's the leader of the people. The people demand a king, a new leader, which at this point is already Samuel. So Samuel goes to God, and God tells him they're not rejecting you, they're rejecting me. Chapter 8, that's chapter 8, verse 7. And so it would seem to us, it would seem to us that he has a reason to feel slighted, but God tells him he doesn't, because they're not rejecting him, they're rejecting God. chapter 9 is all about Saul, the future king, and his chance meeting with Samuel. Not chance, obviously providence. First off, at the end of chapter 9, Samuel, at the end of chapter 9 right here, so Samuel's meeting Saul. I want you to think about and try to remember this chapter. We've just described Saul. We've met Saul. Saul's following the donkeys where he meets Samuel. At the end of chapter 9, if you can remember, when Samuel's meeting Saul and telling him what's happening, does Samuel hold any resentment against Saul? Do you remember? Does Samuel hold any resentment against Saul? Is Samuel mad at Saul? No, he's not. And actually, he gives him the place. He has it in dinner, and he invites a lot of 30 important men. And he gives Saul the place of honor at the table, and he even honors him with the food that he gives him. And Samuel is faithful and a servant of what God tells him to do. I think that's another important detail to point out here is in chapter 9, what qualities of Saul is pointed out? What makes Saul different, special? Remember. He was right, and there was one more. He was handsome. He was the most handsome one, and he was tall. Right? That's the qualifications given for the first king of Israel, Saul. And Saul and everyone else. So, these are the qualities. Are these the qualities expected of a king? A popular one maybe, right? He looks kingly. Is what I think this is kind of getting at. Looking in chapter 9, what does the text say about Saul's heart? Just pointed out that the only thing that we saw of, the only qualification we were given was that he was handsome and tall. What did it say about his heart? Be reading from. It doesn't say anything about Saul's heart. No. And so it's only pointed out how handsome he is and how tall he is. Chapter 10, Samuel anoints Saul and he blesses him. Then Samuel starts to tell Saul what's about to happen to him. Let's jump down to chapter 10. We'll start in verse 6. And then the Spirit of the Lord will come upon you, and you will prophesy with them, be turned into another man. A bunch of men have come down the road prophesying, and Saul's with them, and then we have what we just read in verse 6. And let it be, when the signs come to you, that you do as the occasion demands, for God is with you. You shall go down before me to Gilgal, and surely you will come down to you to offer burnt offerings and make sacrifices and peace offerings. And in 7 days you shall wait till I come to you and show you what you should do. So it was when he had turned his back from Samuel that God gave him another heart. And all those signs came to pass that day. So starting out, finding out that he's becoming king, does Saul have a heart for God in the beginning? Before God changed? Right, I think so. And so originally, we had the qualities pointed out of him being tall and handsome. And then God changes his heart and gives him another one. So no, I don't think he did, but now I think he does. And I point that out for a very specific reason. If you know the end of, if you know where I'm going, I think it ties in pretty well. Chapter 10 ends with Samuel declaring Saul king before the people. 2 verses here before moving on, if you read verse 19 with me. But you have today, he's talking to the Israelites here, but you have today rejected your God, who himself saved you from all your adversaries and your tribulations. And you have said to him, no, set a king over us. Now therefore present yourselves before the Lord by your tribes and by your clans. And so Samuel sorts through the tribes and clans, and he calls Saul for it as king, and Saul is hiding, and they drag Saul out. And then in 24, and Samuel said to all the people, do you see him who the Lord has chosen, that there is no one like him among all the people? So all the people shouted and said, long live the king. And then this chapter concludes, and Samuel is telling everyone how royalty behaves. And a lot of people follow Saul, and they are fine with him. And there are a few doubters. I think that needs to be pointed out. There are a few doubters who don't think Saul should be king. Moving into chapter 11, some of the Ammonites come upon the city of Jabesh Gilead here at the border of Manasseh, and right on the border of Manasseh and Gad. Helpful? So right in here, the Ammonites come in, and Saul pretty much gathers everyone up to come and fight, and he convinces them to fight by getting 2 oxen and then cutting the oxen up into all very tiny pieces, and then has messengers take the pieces out to everyone. And Saul says, if you don't come here, this is what I'm going to do to your oxen. And he said, everyone who doesn't come fight with me and Samuel, this is what I'm going to do with your oxen. So he gathers everyone up, and they go and fight the Ammonites. They kill most of them. They scatter the rest to the point there's no 2 men together anymore. And I just want to look at verses 12 and 13 here. I think it speaks to Saul's heart as God has made it now. And then the people of Samuel, people said to Samuel, who is he who said, shall Saul reign over us? Bring the men that we may put them to death. They're talking about the doubters who said Saul shouldn't be king. But Saul said, not a man shall be put to death this day, for today the Lord has accomplished salvation in Israel. I think this is where we're seeing how God had changed his heart. He just gave credit, and more importantly, glory due to God for this battle. And I believe this speaks to Saul's heart and how God had changed him. Chapter 12, now it's Saul's coronation day, the crowning of the king. And this section, I think, is the first section of Samuel's parting words. I think we have 2 specific sections of Samuel's parting words. Those familiar with this section, is Samuel dying? Samuel, no imminent death. Again, no imminent death. He's doing all right. He's old, but he's doing all right. So, let's read this chapter. 1 Samuel chapter 12. Now Samuel said to all of Israel, indeed I have heeded your voice and all that you said to me, and have made a king over you. Now here is the king walking before you, and I am old and gray-headed, and look, my sons are with you. I have walked before you from my childhood to this day. Here I am, witness against me before the Lord and before his anointed. Whose ox have I taken? Or whose donkey have I taken? Or whom have I cheated? Whom have I oppressed? Or from whose hand have I received any bribe with which to blind my eyes? I will restore it to you. And they said, you have not cheated us or oppressed us, nor have you taken anything from any man's hand. And he said to them, the Lord is witnessed against you, and the Lord has anointed his witness today, that you have not found anything in my hands. And they answered, he is witness, talking about Saul. Then the Lord, I actually want to point out real quick, so he says, whose donkey have I taken? Whose ox have I taken? Who have I cheated? Of your things, what have I taken? How much of this stuff did he say Saul was going to do? All of it, huge chunks of it. All of that and more. So Samuel's already warned them. He's just telling them, I didn't do this stuff. But I've already warned you. He's not saying it now, but he had already warned them that Saul was going to take all this stuff. And they still wanted the king. And then they're in verse 6. Then Samuel said to the people, it is the Lord who raised up Moses and Aaron and brought your fathers up from the land of Egypt. Now therefore stand still, that I may reason with you before the Lord concerning all the righteous acts of the Lord, which he did to you and your fathers. When Jacob had gone into Egypt and your fathers cried out to the Lord, then the Lord sent Moses and Aaron, who brought out your fathers out of Egypt and made them dwell in this place. And when they forgot the Lord their God, he sold them into the hand of Sisera, the commander of Hazor, into the hand of the Philistines, and into the hand of the king of Moab, and they fought against him. Until during the time of the judges. Then they cried out to the Lord and said, have you sinned because you have forsaken the Lord and served the Baals and the Asherahs? But now deliver us from the hand of our enemies, and we will serve you. And the Lord sent Jerubbaal, Bedin, Jephthah, and Samuel, and delivered you out of the hand of your enemies on every side, and you dwelt in safety. And when you saw that Nahash, the king of the Ammonites, this is what we were just talking about, came against you, and you said to me, no, but the king shall reign over us. A king shall reign over us when the Lord your God was your king. Now therefore he is the king whom you have chosen and whom you have desired. And take note, the Lord has set a king over you. If you fear the Lord and serve him and obey his voice, and do not rebel against the commandment of the Lord, then both you and the king who reigns over you will continue following the Lord your God. However, if you do not obey the voice of the Lord, but rebel against the commandment of the Lord, then the hand of the Lord will be against you, as it was against your fathers. Now therefore stand and see this great thing which the Lord will do before your eyes. Is today not the wheat harvest? I will call to the Lord, and he will send thunder and rain, that you may perceive and see that your wickedness is great, which you have done in the sight of the Lord, in asking a king for yourselves. So Samuel called to the Lord, and the Lord sent thunder and rain that day, and all the people greatly feared the Lord and Samuel. And all the people said to Samuel, pray for your servants to the Lord your God, that we may not die. For we have added to all our sins this evil of asking a king for ourselves. And Samuel said to the people, do not fear. You have done all this wickedness, yet do not turn aside from following the Lord, but serve the Lord with all your heart. And do not turn aside, for then you will go after empty things, which cannot profit or deliver, for they are nothing. For the Lord will not forsake his people for his great name's sake, because it has pleased the Lord to make you his people. Moreover, as for me, far be it from me that I should sin against the Lord in ceasing to pray for you, but I will teach you the good and right way. Only fear the Lord and serve him in truth with all your heart, for consider what great things he has done for you. But if you still do wickedly, you shall be swept away, both you and your king. So first off, we'd already pointed out, Samuel's not dying right now. I mean, he just gives the people this rather intense speech. How are these parting words? Think about that for a second. How are these parting words from Samuel? If he's not dying, in what way is he leaving? That was one thing, right? Yeah, so he's warning him here because she's saying that he knew the king was going to corrupt him and they were going to fall away. He's no longer their leader. Absolutely, right? He has been their leader up to this point, and he was groomed from it as a child, basically, and he's led them all this time, and he became great among them. They all knew him. But they've demanded a king and to take over his role, basically. So, and these are his parting words in the sense that Saul is now taking the reins. And in chapter 11, verse 7, when Saul led the people into battle, remember I mentioned, he said, "Whoever does not go up with me and Samuel, he would hurt their oxen, he would cut up their oxen." And this next battle in 13, Saul fully leads the people in that battle. Samuel isn't there, which is kind of an important detail, actually, turns out. But secondly, do these words that Samuel has just given the people, do they sound familiar? We heard these kind of words before. Yeah, a lot like Joshua's final. Absolutely. How many of these leaders that we've gone through so far give the same warning or a similar warning? That pretty much all of them have said something along these lines. So every generation so far that we've read about has had to hear these words, has had to have this warning, has had to have this speech. It's just repeated throughout history. Samuel, as we pointed out earlier, he was still going to be a judge. Remember I brought that part out. Mary Jane pointed it out too. He's still going to be a judge. It said back there that he judged Israel to the day that he died. So even as Saul is king, he must be judging the people under Saul. So, but before he gives up this leadership role to Saul, leadership of the people, I want to read 24 and 25. The last words he says before giving it up is, "Only fear the Lord and serve him in truth with all your heart. For consider all the great things he has done for you. But if you still do wickedly, you shall be swept away, both you and your king." He shows them, first he'd show them how good they had it under him. He rebukes them for his sins. And the last thing he does is leaves them with this warning before he parts from the leadership role. So what is Samuel's role now? What's he left with? He's not the leader anymore. What's he left with? He's priest. Two more things. Prophet, same. God's advisor to the king through this prophet role, I would say, and he's judged. So that's what he has left. I want to think about that for a moment. Does our role change in life? Do our roles change? And does our heart affect that? I think it absolutely does. But does our purpose change? You should mature, yeah. That's where your heart affects it. You should mature. But does our purpose change? All over a purpose entirely. Think so? Right. I think the way we go about it might change, yes, but I think our overall purpose, it does remain the same in honoring God and serving him. So, no, I don't think our purpose change. We'll grow in that role. But Samuel served God so far he served him from a young boy and now all the way up to an old man, and he's not done. He will continue to serve God. Now, if our role changes, can we do anything about it? Can we do anything about our role changing?
Sometimes, yeah.
Yeah, sometimes.
And be more faithful now. That'll have effect. Natural process.
Absolutely right. It's a natural process.
The older we get, changes take place in wisdom and faithfulness. There's change there. If you're going to follow the change that God brings, should enhance rather than, it should be good rather than.
Absolutely. He was saying that we should grow in faith, and the change, we should grow in good things and not in bad. So I think, what can we do about it? We can resist it, or we can embrace it, and we can take on our new role with grace, which is, I think, what we see Samuel doing here. He didn't resist Saul in the beginning. He gave him the place of honor. He guided him. He told the people what was going to happen, but even so, he only told them what God had instructed him to say. So I think Samuel has taken on his new role with a lot of grace, a lot of faith. And similarly, when our roles change, and we know they're going to, what can we do to prepare for it? Fear God and keep His commandments. Absolutely. Study to prepare ourselves for the new role we're supposed to have. Yes.
One of the things I noticed right off is what Rick done.
Yes.
Appreciation and thankfulness for how he's cared for the previous part of our life. Should enhance the coming part of our life even greater.
Absolutely. He was saying that if we remember what the Lord has done for us, that should enhance what is to come. And he was also pointing, I believe, in serve Him with truth and with all your heart. These are things we can prepare as our hearts. Also, I think we can help the one who will be taking our role grow into taking our place. Samuel did that with Saul. And in all that time, in preparing the ones to take our role and looking ahead, we can use our time wisely in preparing for that. Thank you for your comments and attention.